Hagrid was watching him sadly. "Took you from the ruined house myself, on Dumbledore's orders, and brought you to this lot." "Load of old tosh," said Uncle Vernon. Harry jumped. He had almost forgotten that the Dursleys were there. Uncle Vernon certainly seemed to have got back his courage. He was glaring at Hagrid, and his fists were clenched. "Now you listen here, boy," he snarled. "I accept there's something strange about you. Probably nothing a good beating wouldn't have cured. And as for all this about your parents, well, they were weirdos, no denying it. And the world's better off without them, in my opinion. As for all they got, getting mixed up with these wizarding types, just what I expected. Always knew they'd come to a sticky end." But at that moment Hagrid leapt from the sofa and drew a battered pink umbrella from inside his coat. Pointing this at Uncle Vernon like a sword, he said, "I'm warning you, Dursley, I'm warning you. One more word." In danger of being speared on the end of an umbrella by a bearded giant, Uncle Vernon's courage failed again. He flattened himself against the wall and fell silent. "That's better," said Hagrid, breathing heavily, and sitting back down on the sofa, which this time sagged right down to the floor. Harry meanwhile still had questions to ask, hundreds of them. "But what happened to you know who?" "Good question, Harry. Disappeared, vanished. Same night he tried to kill you. Make you even more famous. That's the biggest mystery, see? He was getting more and more powerful. Why'd he go? Some say he died. Codswallop, in my opinion. Dunno if he had enough human left in him to die. Some say he's still out there, biding his time, like, but I don't believe it. People who was on his side came back to ours. Some of 'em came out of kind of trances. Don't reckon they could have done it if he was coming back. Most of us reckon he's still out there somewhere, but lost his powers. Too weak to carry on. 'Cause something about you finished him, Harry. There was something going on that night he hadn't counted on. I don't know what it was. No one does, but something about you stumped him all right." Hagrid looked at Harry with warmth and respect blazing in his eyes, but Harry, instead of feeling pleased and proud, felt quite sure there had been a horrible mistake. A wizard? Him? How could he possibly be? He'd spent his life being clouded by Dudley and bullied by Aunt Petunia and Uncle Vernon. If he was really a wizard, why hadn't they been turned into warty toads every time they tried to lock him in the cupboard? If he'd once defeated the greatest sorcerer in the world, how come Dudley had always been able to kick him around like a football? "Hagrid," he said quietly, "I think you must have made a mistake. I don't think I can be a wizard." To his surprise, Hagrid chuckled. "Not a wizard, eh? Never made things happen when you was scared or angry?" Harry looked into the fire. Now he came to think about it. Every odd thing that had ever made his aunt and uncle furious with him had happened when he, Harry, had been upset or angry. Chased by Dudley's gang, he had somehow found himself out of their reach. Dreading going to school with that ridiculous haircut, he'd managed to make it grow back. And the very last time Dudley had hit him, hadn't he got his revenge without even realizing he was doing it? Hadn't he set a boa constrictor on him? Harry looked back at Hagrid smiling, and saw that Hagrid was positively beaming at him. "See," said Hagrid, "Harry Potter, not a wizard. You wait. You'll be right famous at Hogwarts." But Uncle Vernon wasn't going to give in without a fight. "Haven't I told you he's not going?" he hissed. "He's going to Stonewall High, and he'll be grateful for it. I've read those letters, and he needs all sorts of rubbish, spell books and wands, and—" "If he wants to go, a great muggle like you won't stop him," growled Hagrid. "Stop Lily and James Potter's son going to Hogwarts? You're mad. His name has been down ever since he was born. He's off to the finest school of witchcraft and wizardry in the world. 7 years there, and he won't know himself. He'll be with youngsters of his own sort for a change, and he'll be under the greatest headmaster Hogwarts ever had. Albus Dumbledore. I am not paying for some crackpot old fool to teach him magic tricks," yelled Uncle Vernon. But he had finally gone too far. Hagrid seized his umbrella and whirled it over his head. "Never," he thundered, "insult Albus Dumbledore in front of me." He brought the umbrella swishing down through the air to point at Dudley. There was a flash of violet light, a sound like a firecracker, and a sharp squeal, and the next second Dudley was dancing on the spot with his hands clasped over his fat bottom, howling in pain. When he turned his back on them, Harry saw a curly pig's tail poking through a hole in his trousers.
Uncle Vernon roared. Pulling Aunt Petunia and Dudley into the other room, he cast one last terrified look at Hagrid and slammed the door behind them. Hagrid looked down at his umbrella and stroked his beard. "I shouldn't have lost me temper," he said ruefully. "But it didn't work anyway. Meant to turn him into a pig, but I suppose he was so much like a pig anyway, there wasn't much left for me to do." He cast a sideways look at Harry under his bushy eyebrows. "Be grateful if you didn't mention that to anyone at Hogwarts," he said. Not supposed to do magic, strictly speaking. I was allowed to do a bit for following you, and you get your letters and your stuff. One of the reasons I was so keen to take on the job." "Why aren't you supposed to do magic?" asked Harry. "Oh, well, I was at Hogwarts myself, but, got expelled, to tell you the truth. In me third year, they snapped me wand in half and everything. But Dumbledore let me stay on as gamekeeper. Great man, Dumbledore." "Why were you expelled?" "It's getting late, and we've got lots to do tomorrow," said Hagrid loudly. "Gotta get up to town, get all your books and that." He took off his thick black coat and threw it to Harry. "You can kip under that," he said. "Don't mind if it wriggles a bit. Think I still got a couple of dormice in one of my pockets." Chapter 5. Diagon Alley. Harry woke early the next morning. Although he could tell it was daylight, he kept his eyes shut tight. "It was a dream," he told himself firmly. "I dreamed a giant called Hagrid came to tell me I was going to a school for wizards. When I open my eyes, I'll be at home in my cupboard." There was suddenly a loud tapping noise. "And there's Aunt Petunia knocking on the door," Harry thought, his heart sinking. But he still didn't open his eyes. It had been such a good dream. Tap, tap, tap. "All right," Harry mumbled, "I'm getting up." He sat up, and Hagrid's heavy coat fell on him. The hut was full of sunlight. The storm was over. Hagrid himself was asleep on the collapsed sofa, and there was an owl rapping its claw on the window, a newspaper held in its beak. Harry scrambled to his feet, so happy he felt as though a large balloon was swelling inside him. He went straight to the window and jerked it open. The owl swooped in and dropped the newspaper on top of Hagrid, who didn't wake up. The owl then fluttered onto the floor and began to attack Hagrid's coat. "Don't do that." Harry tried to wave the owl out of the way, but it snapped its beak fiercely at him and carried on savaging the coat. "Hagrid," said Harry loudly, "there's an owl." "Pay him," Hagrid grunted into the sofa. "What?" "He wants paying for delivering the paper. Look in my pockets." Hagrid's coat seemed to be made of nothing but pockets. Bunches of keys, slug pellets, balls of string, peppermint humbugs, tea bags. Finally, Harry pulled out a handful of strange-looking coins. "Give him 5 nuts," said Hagrid sleepily. "Nuts?" "The little bronze ones." Harry counted out 5 little bronze coins, and the owl held out his leg so Harry could put the money into a small leather pouch tied to it. Then he flew off through the open window. Hagrid yawned loudly, sat up, and stretched. "Best be off, Harry. Lots to do today. Got to get up to London and buy all your stuff for school." Harry was turning over the wizard coins and looking at them. He had just thought of something that made him feel as though the happy balloon inside him had got a puncture. Hagrid?" "Hmm?" said Hagrid, who was pulling on his huge boots. "I haven't got any money, and you heard Uncle Vernon last night. He won't pay for me to go and learn magic." "Don't worry about that," said Hagrid, standing up and scratching his head. "You think your parents didn't leave you anything?" "But if their house was destroyed—" "They didn't keep their gold in their house, boy. Now, first stop for us is Gringotts, Wizard's Bank. Have a sausage, they're not bad cold. And I wouldn't say no to a bit of your birthday cake, neither." "Wizards have banks?"
"Just the one, Gringotts, run by goblins."
Harry dropped the bit of sausage he was holding. "Goblins?"
"Yeah. So you'd be mad to try and rob it, I'll tell you that. Never mess with goblins, Harry. Gringotts is the safest place in the world for anything you want to keep safe. Except maybe Hogwarts. As a matter of fact, I gotta visit Gringotts anyway, for Dumbledore. Hogwarts business." Hagrid drew himself up proudly. "He usually gets me to do important stuff for him. Fetching you, getting things from Gringotts. Knows he can trust me, see?" "Got everything? Come on, then."
Harry followed Hagrid out onto the rock. The sky was quite clear now, and the sea gleamed in the sunlight. The boat Uncle Vernon had hired was still there, with a lot of water in the bottom after the storm. How did you get here? Harry asked, looking around for another boat.
Flew, said Hagrid.
Flew?
Yeah, but we'll go back in this. Not supposed to use magic now, I've got you.
They settled down in the boat, Harry still staring at Hagrid, trying to imagine him flying.
Seems a shame to row, though, said Hagrid, giving Harry another of his sideways looks. If I was to, speed things up a bit, would you mind not mentioning it at Hogwarts?
Of course not, said Harry, eager to see more magic. Hagrid pulled out the pink umbrella again, tapped it twice on the side of the boat, and they sped off toward land. Why would you be mad to try and rob Gringotts? Harry said.
Spells, enchantments,
unfolding his newspaper as he spoke, said Hagrid.
They said there's dragons guarding the high-security vaults, and then you gotta find your way. Gringotts is hundreds of miles under London, see? Deep under the underground. You'd die of hunger trying to get out, even if you did manage to get your hands on something.
Harry sat and thought about this while Hagrid read his newspaper, The Daily Prophet. Harry had learned from Uncle Vernon that people liked to be left alone while they did this, but it was very difficult. He never had so many questions in his life.
Ministry of Magic messing things up as usual, Hagrid muttered, turning the page.
There's a Ministry of Magic? Harry asked, before he could stop himself.
Course, said Hagrid. They wanted Dumbledore for minister, of course, but he'd never leave Hogwarts. So old Cornelius Fudge got the job. Bungler, if there ever was one. So he pelts Dumbledore with owls every morning, asking for advice.
But what does a Ministry of Magic do?
Well, their main job is to keep it from the Muggles, that there's still witches and wizards up and down the country.
Why?
Why, blimey, Harry, everyone be wanting magic solutions to their problems. Now we're best left alone.
At this moment the boat bumped gently into the harbor wall. Hagrid folded up his newspaper and they clambered up the stone steps onto the street. Passers-by stared a lot at Hagrid as they walked through the little town to the station. Harry couldn't blame them. Not only was Hagrid twice as tall as anyone else, he kept pointing at perfectly ordinary things like parking meters and saying loudly,
See that, Harry? Things these Muggles dream up, eh?
Hagrid, said Harry, panting a bit as he ran to keep up, did you say there are dragons at Gringotts?
Well, so they say, said Hagrid. Crikey, I'd like a dragon.
You'd like one?
Wanted one ever since I was a kid. Here we go.
They had reached the station. There was a train to London in 5 minutes' time. Hagrid, who didn't understand Muggle money, as he called it, gave the bills to Harry so he could buy their tickets. Harry stared more than ever on the train. Hagrid looked up 2 seats and sat knitting what looked like a canary yellow circus tent.
Got your letter, Harry? He asked as they counted the stitches.
Harry took the parchment envelope out of his pocket.
Good, said Hagrid. There's a list there, everything you need.
Harry unfolded a second piece of paper he hadn't noticed the night before, and read, Hogwarts, School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, Uniform. First-year students will require 1 3 sets of plain work robes, black. 2, 1 plain pointed hat, black, for day wear. 3, 1 pair of protective gloves, dragon hide or similar. 4, 1 winter cloak, black, silver fastenings. Please note that all pupils' clothes should carry name tags. Course books. All students should have a copy of each of the following. The Standard Book of Spells, Grade 1 by Miranda Goshawk. A History of Magic by Bathilda Bagshot. Magical Theory by Aldebert Waffling. A Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration by Emmerich Switch. 1000 Magical Herbs and Fungi by Philida Spore. Magical Draughts and Potions by Arsenius Jigger. Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them by Newt Scamander. The Dark Forces, A Guide to Self-Protection by Quentin Trimble. Other equipment. 1 wand, 1 cauldron, pewter, standard size 2, 1 set of crystal files, 1 telescope, 1 brass scales. Students may also bring an owl or a cat or a toad. Parents are reminded that first years are not allowed on their own broomsticks.